A man salvaged space junk. It turned out to be a badass alien warrior woman. Cade thought he scored big when he pulled a battered escape pod from a debris field. He expected scrap, maybe a few spare parts, not a purple-skinned, silver-eyed warrior who woke up swinging and nearly broke his jaw. Now, they're on the run from mercenaries, traitors, and an empire that wants her dead, and him even deader. Want to see what happens next? Hit that subscribe button. You won't want to miss this ride. The void stretched out endlessly before Cade Rylan, a black canvas speckled with the glowing red embers of a dying star. Out here, in the ass end of nowhere, space wasn't just empty, it was a graveyard. Twisted husks of star ships spun lazily through the vacuum, their jagged edges catching the crimson light like broken teeth in a cosmic jaw. The debris field was massive, a sprawling mess of metal and ruin that screamed recent disaster, louder than any distress signal ever could. Cade leaned back in the creaky pilot's chair of the Stellar Fong, his boots propped up on the console, and let out a low whistle. "Looks like someone threw a hell of a party and forgot to invite me," he muttered, running a hand through his messy brown hair. At 35, Cade was no stranger to the galaxy's underbelly. A freelance pilot with a knack for scavenging, he'd built a life out of dodging trouble and turning trash into treasure. The Stellar Fong was his home, a battered, rust-streaked relic that groaned like an old man every time he pushed the throttle. Its hull was patched with mismatched plating, and the cockpit smelled faintly of burnt coffee and engine grease. But it was his, and it hadn't killed him yet. "Scans are picking up something weird, boss," came the voice of Jax, the ship's AI. It crackled through the intercom with a tone that was equal parts snark and static. "No distress beacons, but there's a faint energy signature out there. Could be junk. Could be jackpot. Your call." Cade grinned, his hazel eyes glinting with a mix of curiosity and greed. "Jackpot, huh? You know I can't resist a good gamble, Jax. Let's take a closer look." He flicked a few switches, the control panel lighting up with a patchwork of flickering green and amber lights. The Stellar Fong hummed reluctantly as it drifted toward the source, a lone escape pod, drifting like a forgotten coffin among the wreckage. "Careful, Cade," Jax warned. "Last time he got curious, we ended up with a cargo hold full of irradiated scrap and a bounty hunter on our tail. I'm not in the mood to play babysitter again." "Relax, you glorified calculator," Cade shot back, already pulling on a pair of gloves. "If it's trouble, I'll just talk my way out of it. Works every time." Jax snorted, a sound that was impressively human for a string of code. "Sure, your mouth's gonna get us killed one day. Mark my words." The pod was small, barely big enough for one person, its surface scorched black and pitted with micrometeor scars. Cade maneuvered the Stellar Fong's grappling arm with practiced ease, snagging the pod and hauling it into the cargo bay with a dull thunk. He grabbed a handheld scanner and headed down the narrow corridor, his boots clanging against the metal floor. The bay was a mess of crates and spare parts, lit by dim yellow bulbs that buzzed like dying flies. "All right, let's see what the universe dropped in my lap today," he said, prying open the pod's hatch with a hiss of depressurized air. The moment it cracked open, Cade froze. Inside, curled up like a predator waiting to strike, was a woman. But not just any woman. This one was something else entirely. Her skin shimmered a deep, iridescent purple, like polished amethyst under the bay's weak lights. Long black hair, matted with dried blood, spilled over her sharp, angular face. Her ears swept back in elegant, pointed curves, and her body, holy hell, her body, was a masterpiece of lean muscle and dangerous curves, barely contained by a torn armored suit that clung to her like a second skin. The suit was cracked across the chest, revealing a glimpse of that glistening purple flesh, and Cade had to force himself to blink. "Mother of all stars," he breathed, his voice barely above a whisper. "I hit the damn jackpot." She wasn't moving, her chest rising and falling in shallow, uneven breaths. In her right hand, she clutched a cylindrical device, smooth, metallic, and etched with strange runes that pulsed faintly with a dull blue glow. It didn't look like any weapon or tool Cade had ever seen, and he'd seen a lot. "Jax, run a scan," he called, stepping closer despite the voice in his head screaming this is a bad idea. Tell me what I'm dealing with here. Organic life form, female, heavily injured, Jax replied after a moment. Fractured ribs, plasma burns, signs of dehydration. But here's the kicker. Her physiology's off the charts. Self-regenerating tissue, elevated muscle density, and a metabolic rate that says she's not human. Not even close. Cade crouched beside the pod, his scanner whirring as it confirmed Jax's report. Not human, huh? Figures. She looks like she could snap me in half and still have energy to dance on my grave. He tilted his head, studying her face. High cheekbones, a jawline sharp enough to cut glass, and those ears that screamed alien warrior. What's with the glow stick she's holding? Unknown, Jax said. Energy signature stable but unreadable. Could be a power core, could be a bomb. You're the genius who brought it aboard, so you figure it out. Cade snorted. Thanks for the vote of confidence. He hesitated, then reached out to nudge her shoulder. Hey, purple lady, you alive in there? I'm not running a morgue here. No response. Her breathing hitched slightly, but her eyes stayed shut. Cade sighed, rubbing the back of his neck. Great. Guess I'm playing hero today. He slid his arms under her, careful not to jostle her too much, and lifted. She was heavier than she looked, all dense muscle and battle-hardened weight, and Cade grunted as he hoisted her out of the pod. Damn, you're solid, he muttered, stumbling a step before steadying himself. Her head lolled against his chest, and for a split second, he caught a whiff of something, metallic sharp, like blood mixed with ozone. It sent a shiver down his spine, but he shook it off. Med bays this way, he said, mostly to himself, as he carried her through the ship. Let's hope you don't wake up and decide I'm lunch. Jax chimed in again, its tone dripping with sarcasm. Oh, I'm sure she'll be thrilled to meet her knight in shining rust. Just don't expect a thank you note. Cade smirked, adjusting his grip on the unconscious warrior. Yeah, well, if she's trouble, at least she's the good-looking kind. That's a win in my book. The stellar Fong hummed around him, oblivious to the storm he'd just invited aboard. Out there, in the wreckage, something had gone terribly wrong, and Cade had a sinking feeling he was about to find out what. Cade staggered into the med bay of the stellar Fong, the purple-skinned warrior still limp in his arms. The room was a cramped box of flickering lights and outdated tech. Half the equipment looked like it belonged in a museum, and the other half was held together with duct tape and prayers. He grunted as he hefted her onto the exam table, her weight making his back scream in protest. You owe me a massage for this, lady, he muttered, wiping sweat from his brow. Her head lolled to the side, that strange cylindrical device still clutched tight in her hand, like it was the last thing tethering her to life. Jax, fire up the med scanner, Cade called, grabbing a handheld kit from a nearby shelf. Let's see how bad she's messed up before she decides I'm the enemy. Already on it, Jax replied, its voice buzzing through the speakers. And for the record, if she snaps your neck, I'm not cleaning up the mess. The scanner hummed to life, a faint blue beam sweeping over the woman's body. Cade watched the readouts flicker across a cracked screen. Fractured ribs, a nasty plasma burn along her side, dehydration severe enough to kill a lesser being. But then the numbers spiked. Her cells were regenerating, knitting themselves back together at a rate that made Cade's jaw drop. Holy hell, he breathed. She's a damn tank. What is she? Vorin, if I had to guess, Jax said, its tone shifting from snark to something closer to awe. Warrior race from a dead-end system. Tough as nails, live for centuries, bred for combat. You've got yourself a real prize, Cade. Prize or problem, he shot back, but his eyes were locked on her. That purple skin shimmered under the med bay's harsh lights, and her torn armor hugged every curve like it was painted on. He shook his head, forcing himself to focus. All right, let's patch her up before she wakes up swinging. He grabbed a med spray and a roll of bandages, leaning over her to get to the burn on her side. Her armor was split open there, exposing a stretch of smooth, glistening flesh that practically begged to be stared at. Cade swallowed hard, his hands moving carefully as he sprayed the wound. Just doing my job, he muttered, half to himself, half to whatever cosmic force might be judging him. That's when she stirred. A low growl rumbled from her throat, and before Cade could blink, her eyes snapped open, bright silver, sharp as blades, and locked on him. In a flash, she lunged, a hidden dagger appearing in her hand from God's knew where. The blade pressed against his throat, cold and steady, even as her body trembled from the effort. "Who are you?" she rasped, her voice rough but commanding, like a storm trapped in a whisper. "Where am I?" Cade froze, his hands halfway raised, the med spray still dangling from his fingers. Her face was inches from his, those silver eyes boring into him, and he could feel the heat radiating off her purple skin. "Whoa, easy there, killer," he said, keeping his tone light despite the blade tickling his Adam's apple. "Name's Cade, Rylan. You're on my ship, the Stellar Fawn. Found you half dead in a pod out there. I'm fixing you up, so maybe don't slit my throat just yet." She didn't move, didn't blink, the dagger steady as stone. Her breath came in shallow bursts, and Cade could see the strain in her clenched jaw, the way her muscles quivered under that gorgeous purple hide. "You're lying," she hissed. "No human helps without a price." "Price? Lady, I haven't even had time to think of one," he said, flashing a grin he hoped looked more charming than terrified. "Look, you were floating in a junk pile, about to become space dust. I pulled you in 'cause I'm a sucker for a good mystery." That's it. Her eyes narrowed, searching his face for a crack in his story. The silence stretched, thick and heavy, until finally she let out a ragged breath and slumped back onto the table. The dagger slipped from her fingers, clattering to the floor, and her head hit the padding with a soft thud. Cade exhaled hard, his heart hammering in his chest. "Well, that was fun," he muttered, picking up the dagger and tossing onto a nearby tray. "Jax, remind me to install a no-stabbing rule for guests." "Noted," Jax said, "though I doubt she'll care. She's Vorin. They don't do rules, they do war." "Yeah, I got that vibe," Cade said, turning back to her. She was out again, her chest rising and falling unevenly. He shook his head and resumed his work, spraying the last of the burn and wrapping her ribs with bandages. "Stay down this time, all right? I'm too pretty to die today." When he finished, he stepped back, wiping his hands on his pants. She looked less like a corpse now, more like a sleeping predator. Dangerous, sure, but damn if she wasn't sight. That purple skin caught the light in a way that made his brain stutter, and the way her armor hugged her hips wasn't helping. He caught himself staring and quickly turned away, muttering, "Get a grip, Cade. She's not here for a date." A few hours later, she stirred again, this time without the knife-to-throat routine. Cade was in the galley, nursing a cup of lukewarm coffee, when he heard the shuffle of boots behind him. He turned to see her standing in the doorway, one hand braced against the wall, her silver eyes glinting in the dim light. "Welcome back to the land of the living," he said, raising his mug. "Name's still Cade, in case you forgot. You got one. Or do I just call you Purple?" She straightened, her posture stiff but regal, like a queen sizing up a peasant. "Zyra Vera," she said, her voice steadier now. "Warrior of Vorin." "Zyra, huh? Fancy," Cade said, leaning against the counter. "So, Zyra, Warrior of Vorin, want to tell me why I found you floating in a busted pod in the middle of nowhere? Or is that a stab me if I ask kind of question?" Her jaw tightened, and for a moment, he thought she might actually go for the dagger again. Instead, she crossed her arms, making that torn armor strain in ways Cade really wished he hadn't noticed, and said, "I owe you no answers, human." "Fair enough," he shrugged, taking a sip of his coffee. "But here's the deal. You're on my ship, breathing my air, and I'm not dumping you back into space. Yet. So how about we start with something simple? Like, say, what's that glowy stick you were hugging like a teddy bear?" Her hand twitched toward her side, with a cylindrical device now sat on a crate nearby. "It is not your concern," she snapped, but there was a flicker in her eyes, something like pain or fear. Cade raised an eyebrow. "Not my concern, huh? Funny, 'cause I'm the one who dragged it. And you, out of a debris field." "Jax, what do we know about that thing?" "Still unreadable," Jax chimed in. "Energy signature's old, real old. Could be a power core, could be a weapon, could be the key to something big. Your guess is as good as mine. Zyra's gaze darted to the device, then back to Cade. You will not touch it, she said, stepping forward. Her movement was unsteady, but the threat in her voice was sharp as ever. Relax, I'm not a thief, Cade said, holding up his hands. Well, not today. Look, Zyra, you're hurt. You're stuck here, and I'm not your enemy. How about we call a truce? I fix you up, you don't kill me, and maybe we figure out what's going on together. She studied him for a long moment, those silver eyes cutting through him like lasers. Finally, she gave a curt nod. For now. Good enough, Cade said, grinning. He grabbed a spare canteen from the counter and tossed it to her. Drink. You look like you haven't seen water in a week. She caught it midair, her reflexes razor-sharp despite her injuries. She eyed the canteen like it might be poisoned, then took a cautious sip. Her face twisted slightly. Disgust, maybe, but she drank anyway. Not bad, huh? Cade said, watching her. Human hospitality. Stick around. I might even cook you something. Zyra shot him a look that could have melted steel. I do not eat human food. What? Too good for it, he teased. What do Vorn eat, then? Raw meat? Enemy hearts? Protein? Dense? Pure, she said, her tone flat. Your kind weakens itself with slop. Cade laughed, loud and genuine. Slop, huh? You're gonna love my cooking, then? See tights? Sula. You're in for a ride. She didn't respond, but she didn't leave either. She sank onto a crate, her posture stiff, her eyes never leaving him. Cade felt a prickle on the back of his neck. Not fear exactly, but something else. This woman was a storm waiting to break, and he'd just invited her into his world. Jax, he muttered under his breath. Keep an eye on her. I've got a feeling she's more than she's letting on. Understatement of the century, Jax replied. Good luck, boss. You're gonna need it. The stellar Fong hummed quietly as Cade leaned back in the galley, sipping his coffee and watching Zyra from the corner of his eye. She sat perched on a crate, her silver gaze flicking between him and the cylindrical device resting on the counter. The air between them crackled. Not quite trust, not quite hostility, but something electric nonetheless. Cade couldn't shake the feeling that he'd poked a hornet's nest by bringing her aboard. But hell, if he wasn't curious to see what came of it. All right, Zyra, warrior of Vorin, he said, breaking the silence with a grin. You're hydrated, you're patched up, and you haven't stabbed me yet. I call that progress. So what's next? You got a ride coming, or are we stuck together till the stars burn out? Her lips pressed into a thin line, and for a moment, he thought she'd ignore him again. Then she spoke, her voice low and clipped. I have no ride. My path ended in that pod. Cade raised an eyebrow. Ended, huh? Sounds like a story. Care to share? Or is it still stab me if I ask territory? Her eyes narrowed, but before she could snap back, a sharp beep 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 cut through the room. The galley's comm panel lit up red, and Jax's voice burst through the speakers, sharp and urgent. Cade, we've got company. Unknown ship, closing fast, 500 clicks and gaining. And it's not sending party invites. Cade bolted upright, coffee sloshing over the rim of his mug. What? Out here. He darted to the cockpit, Zyra on his heels, her movements swift despite the bandages wrapped around her ribs. The Stellar Fong's control room was a mess of blinking lights and patched wiring, but Cade slid into the pilot's chair like it was an extension of him. His fingers flew over the console, pulling up the sensor feed. There it was, a sleek, angular ship, its hull glinting like obsidian under the red glow of the dying star. It was fast, too fast, and its energy signature screamed military-grade tech. Cade squinted at the display, then glanced at Zyra. Friend of yours? Her face hardened, her silver eyes locking onto the screen. No, she said, her voice a growl. Enemies. Traitors of Vorin. Traitors? Cade's stomach twisted. Great. Just what I needed. Someone else's war crashing my quiet day. He slammed the throttle forward, the Stellar Fong lurching as its engines roared to life. Jax, shields up. Let's see if we can outrun these bastards. Shields at 60%, Jax reported. Which, by the way, is generous for this rust bucket. Good luck. The ship jolted as a warning klaxon blared. Proximity alert. Cade cursed under his breath, yanking the controls to weave through the debris field. Twisted chunks of metal loomed like jagged ghosts, and he dodged them with a mix of skill and sheer desperation. "Come on, baby, don't fail me now," he muttered to the Fawn. A flash of light streaked past the viewport. Plasma fire. The enemy ship was shooting, and they weren't messing around. The first volley grazed the hull, sending a shudder through the deck. Cade glanced at Zyra, who'd braced herself against the co-pilot's seat, her jaw clenched tight. "Any chance they just want to chat?" he asked, half hoping. "They want me," she said, her voice cold as steel. "And the core." The core. Cade's eyes flicked to the cylindrical device, still sitting innocently in the galley. "That glow stick? What's so special about it?" She didn't answer, her gaze fixed on the viewport as another blast rocked the ship. The stellar Fawn groaned, a panel sparking overhead, and Cade swore loudly. "Fine, keep your secrets. But if we're dying for it, I deserve a heads up." The chase was on, the enemy ship weaving through the wreckage with predatory grace. Cade pushed the Fawn harder, banking sharply around a massive chunk of a destroyed freighter. The move bought them a few seconds, but the sensors screamed as the gap closed again. "They're too fast," he grunted, sweat beading on his forehead. "We're screwed unless we get creative." "Creative?" Zyra shot him a look, her silver eyes glinting with something like disbelief. "Yeah, human specialty," he said, flashing a reckless grin. "Hold on tight, purple." He punched a sequence into the console, rerouting power from the shields to the engines. The Fawn surged forward, rattling like it was about to shake itself apart, and Cade aimed straight for the densest part of the debris field. "What are you doing?" Zyra demanded, gripping the seat as the ship lurched. "Playing chicken," he said, his voice tight with focus. "They're bigger, fancier, but they won't risk a head-on crash." The viewport filled with spinning metal, shards of hulls, broken engines, a graveyard closing in. A plasma bolt slammed into a nearby wreck, sending fragments pinging off the Fawn's hull. Cade yanked the controls, threading the needle between two massive slabs of debris just as the enemy ship fired again. The shot missed, exploding against a drifting fuel tank in a brilliant fireball. "Huh, suck on that." Cade hooped, but the celebration was short-lived. The Fawn clipped a stray beam, and the whole ship bucked violently. Cade and Zyra were thrown forward. He crashed into the console, and she slammed into him, her body pinning him against the controls. For a split second, time slowed. Her chest pressed against his back, her purple skin hot through the thin fabric of his shirt, and his hand, by some cruel twist of fate, landed on her hip, fingers brushing the curve where her armor met bare flesh. "Holy," he started, his brain short-circuiting at the feel of her, all muscle and heat. "Move," she snarled, shoving him off and scrambling back to her feet. Her face was flushed, anger, maybe, or something else, and Cade shook himself back to reality, his cheeks burning. "Right, sorry, tight quarters," he stammered, yanking the controls again. The Fawn stabilized, barely, and Cade spotted a gap in the debris, a narrow tunnel of clear space. He gunned it, the ship screaming in protest as they shot through. The enemy ship hesitated, too bulky to follow, and Cade let out a shaky laugh as the sensors showed the distance growing. "See? Told you. Human ingenuity beats fancy toys any day." Zyra didn't reply, her breathing heavy as she sank into the co-pilot's seat. The silence stretched, broken only by the Fawn's creaking hull, until she finally spoke. "They will not stop." Cade glanced at her, wiping sweat from his brow. "Yeah, I figured. So, Zyra, how about you spill something useful? Like who they are, and why they're so hot for that core." Her silver eyes met his, hard and unyielding, but there was a crack in her armor now, a flicker of exhaustion, maybe even trust. "They were my kin," she said, her voice low. "Warriors of Vorin. I led them to find the core, a relic of our past, a key to power beyond your understanding. They betrayed me, left me to die, and now they hunt it for themselves. Kate blinked, processing. Betrayed you? Damn, that's cold. What's the core do exactly? It awakens the Cryon Vanguard, she said, her gaze distant. A warship from Voron's golden age. One ship, enough to burn galaxies. His jaw dropped. A galaxy buster? And you were just carrying it around? It was my duty, she snapped, but her voice wavered. Until they turned. Kate leaned back, whistling low. Well, shit. That's a hell of a mess you've dragged me into. He tapped the console, pulling up a damage report. Shields fried, hull dented, but they were alive. Guess we're in this together now. Zyra studied him, her silver eyes searching his face. You could have left me, she said, quieter now. Why didn't you? 'Cause I'm an idiot, he said with a grin. And maybe 'cause humans don't ditch people who need help, even if they're stabby purple warriors with galaxy-destroying toys. Her lips twitched, almost a smile, but not quite. You are strange, Cade Ryland. Yeah, I get that a lot, he said, turning back to the controls. Jax, set a course for anywhere but here. We've got some breathing room, but I'm betting those traitors aren't done with us. Course plotted, Jax replied. Try not to piss off any more alien death squads, all right? No promises, Cade muttered, stealing a glance at Zyra. She was staring out the viewport, her purple skin catching the faint starlight, and for all the trouble she'd brought, he couldn't shake the feeling that sticking with her was the best bad idea he'd ever had. The viewport filled with spinning metal, shards of hulls, broken engines, a graveyard closing in. A plasma bolt slammed into a nearby wreck, sending fragments pinging off the Fong's hull. Cade yanked the controls, threading the needle between two massive slabs of debris just as the enemy ship fired again. The shot missed, exploding against a drifting fuel tank in a brilliant fireball. Huh, suck on that. Cade hooped, but the celebration was short-lived. The Fong clipped a stray beam, and the whole ship bucked violently. Cade and Zyra were thrown forward. He crashed into the console, and she slammed into him, her body pinning him against the controls. For a split second, time slowed. Her chest pressed against his back, her purple skin hot through the thin fabric of his shirt, and his hand, by some cruel twist of fate, landed on her hip, fingers brushing the curve where her armor met bare flesh. Holy, he started, his brain short-circuiting at the feel of her, all muscle and heat. Move, she snarled, shoving him off and scrambling back to her feet. Her face was flushed, anger, maybe, or something else. And Cade shook himself back to reality, his cheeks burning. Right, sorry, tight quarters, he stammered, yanking the controls again. The Fong stabilized, barely, and Cade spotted a gap in the debris, a narrow tunnel of clear space. He gunned it, the ship screaming in protest as they shot through. The enemy ship hesitated, too bulky to follow, and Cade let out a shaky laugh as the sensors showed the distance growing. See? Told you. Human ingenuity beats fancy toys any day. Zyra didn't reply, her breathing heavy as she sank into the co-pilot's seat. The silence stretched, broken only by the Fong's creaking hull, until she finally spoke. They will not stop. Cade glanced at her, wiping sweat from his brow. Yeah, I figured. So, Zyra, how about you spill something useful? Like who they are, and why they're so hot for that core. Her silver eyes met his, hard and unyielding, but there was a crack in her armor now, a flicker of exhaustion, maybe even trust. They were my kin, she said, her voice low. Warriors of Voron. I led them to find the core, a relic of our past, a key to power beyond your understanding. They betrayed me, left me to die, and now they hunt it for themselves. Cade blinked, processing. Betrayed you? Damn, that's cold. What's the core do exactly? It awakens the Cryon Vanguard, she said, her gaze distant. A warship from Voron's golden age. One ship, enough to burn galaxies. His jaw dropped. A galaxy buster? And you were just carrying it around? It was my duty, she snapped, but her voice wavered. Until they turned. Cade leaned back, whistling low. Well, shit. That's a hell of a mess you've dragged me into. He tapped the console, pulling up a damage report. Shields fried, hull dented, but they were alive. Guess we're in this together now. Zyra studied him, her silver eyes searching his face. "You could have left me," she said, quieter now. "Why didn't you?" "'Cause I'm an idiot," he said with a grin. "And maybe 'cause humans don't ditch people who need help, even if they're stabby purple warriors with galaxy-destroying toys." Her lips twitched, almost a smile, but not quite. "You are strange, Cade Rylan." "Yeah, I get that a lot," he said, turning back to the controls. "Jax set a course for anywhere but here. We got some breathing room, but I'm betting those traitors aren't done with us." "Course plotted," Jax replied. "Try not to piss off any more alien death squads, all right?" "No promises," Cade muttered, stealing a glance at Zyra. She was staring out the viewport, her purple skin catching the faint starlight, and for all the trouble she'd brought, he couldn't shake the feeling that sticking with her was the best bad idea he'd ever had. The lead Viper, a hulking brute with a cybernetic arm, stopped a few feet away, his voice grating through a modulator. "Cade Rylan, hand over the Vorin and the core, or we paint this station with your blood." Cade forced a laugh, his hand hovering near the blaster on his hip. "Wow, straight to threats? No hello, no nice ship? Look, I don't know what your boss told you, but she's not for sale, and neither's her glow stick. How about we talk this out over a drink?" The Viper's response was a plasma rifle snapping up. "Last chance." "Guess that's a no," Cade sighed, then shouted, "Zyra, duck." The first shot scorched the air where her head had been, and chaos erupted. Zyra moved like a blur, slamming into the lead Viper with a shoulder charge that sent him crashing through a stall. Cade dubbed behind a crate, blaster in hand, and fired off a wild shot that clipped the second Merc's armor. "Love your style. Purple," he yelled, popping up to nail another round. Zyra didn't answer. She was too busy snapping the third Viper's wrist with a brutal twist, her purple skin gleaming with sweat as she flung him into a pile of scrap. The market dissolved into screams and fleeing bodies, vendors scrambling for cover as plasma bolts tore through the air. Cade ducked a stray shot, the heat singeing his sleeve, and lobbed a coolant canister at the lead Viper. It exploded in a cloud of white mist, buying Zyra a second to close the gap. She was a whirlwind, graceful, deadly, every move precise. The lead Viper swung his cybernetic arm, but she caught it, twisting until metal groaned and sparks flew. Cade winced. "Remind me never to arm wrestle you," he called, popping up to blast the second Merc square in the chest. The guy dropped, and Cade hooped. 2 down, but the fight wasn't over. The lead Viper roared, shaking off Zyra and firing a barrage that forced her back. She stumbled, her injured ribs slowing her, and a bolt grazed her shoulder, searing purple flesh. Cade's grin vanished. "Oh, hell no," he muttered, and without thinking he charged. He tackled Zyra out of the line of fire, both of them hitting the deck hard. The impact knocked the wind out of him, his body shielding hers as a plasma bolt scorched the ground where she'd stood. For a heartbeat, he was sprawled over her, his chest pressed against hers, his hand gripping her waist where her armor gapped. Her skin was hot, firm under his fingers, and he blurted, Sorry, tight spot," before rolling off, his face redder than the star outside. Zyra shoved him aside, her silver eyes blazing. "Fool," she snapped, but there was no time to argue. She sprang up, fury fueling her, and drove her fist into the Viper's visor. Glass shattered, and the Merc crumpled, his cyber arm sparking uselessly. Cade scrambled to his feet, panting. "Nice one, Purple. We done." She nodded, breathing hard, her shoulders smoldering where the bolt had hit. The market was a wreck, crates overturned, stalls smoking, but the Vipers were down. Cade holstered his blaster, wincing at a fresh burn on his arm. "Guess we're not welcome here anymore." Before they could move, a raspy voice cut through the chaos. "You want answers about that core?" An old human trader, grizzled and half-drunk, limped toward them from a nearby stall. "I know what it is." Cade exchanged a look with Zyra. "Talk," she demanded, stepping forward. The trader smirked, leaning on a cane. "That's no trinket. It's the ignition key for the Cryon Vanguard, Vorin's lost titan. One ship, big enough to crack planets, armed to the teeth. Your trader pals? They're selling it to the Zarvox Empire. Heard him bragging last week." Cade's blood ran cold. Zarvox. Those psychos who glassed the Orion Belt. Same ones, the traitor said. They'll pay a fortune to burn the galaxy down. Zyra's fists clenched, her silver eyes darkening. Then they must not have it. Agreed, Cade said, turning to her. But we're outgunned and outmanned. What's the play? She didn't answer right away, her gaze drifting to his burned arm. You shielded me, she said, almost accusingly. Why? 'Cause I'm not letting you die on my watch, he said, shrugging despite the sting. Call it human stubbornness. Her lips twitched, barely a smile, but it was there. You are reckless, Cade Rylan. Yeah, and you're welcome, he grinned. Now, let's get back to the Fong before more of these clowns show up. They hauled their loot, fuel cells, coils, and a dented crate of ammo. Back to the ship, Zyra moving slower now, her shoulders stiff. In the med bay, Cade grabbed a bandage roll. Sit, he said, pointing to the table. You're a mess. She glared but complied, and he stepped close, carefully wrapping her shoulder. His fingers brushed her purple skin, warm, smooth, electric, and he muttered, Gotta stop getting shot purple. I'm running out of bandages. Stop talking, she said, but her silver eyes softened, just a fraction. And thank you. Cade blinked, caught off guard. Huh, didn't think Vorin did gratitude. Do not test me, she warned, but there was no venom in it. He chuckled, stepping back. All right, truce holds. Now, how do we keep that core out of Zarvok's hands? Her answer was a steely stare. We fight. Figured you'd say that. Cade sighed, but his grin was back. Guess we're a team now, purple. The stellar Fong hummed around them, ready for the next storm. The stellar Fong shuddered as its airlock sealed behind Cade and Zyra, shutting out the chaos of Varkey 7. The ship's interior was a welcome relief from the smoke and blaster fire. Dim, cluttered, and smelling faintly of burnt circuits, but safe for now. Cade slumped against the wall of the cargo bay, his burned arm throbbing under its makeshift bandage, the crate of scavenged ammo and fuel cells clattering to the floor beside him. Zyra stood a few feet away, her silver eyes scanning the shadows, her purple skin still smudged with soot from the fight. Her shoulder was stiff, the fresh bandage Cade had wrapped around it already stained with a faint purple tinge. Her blood, he guessed. Jax, get us out of here, Cade called, his voice rough with exhaustion. I don't care where, just away from that damn station before more Vipers crawl out of the woodwork. Engines spooling. Jax replied, its tone clipped but steady. You two look like hell, by the way. Need a damage report. Later, Cade said, waving a hand. Just fly. The deck vibrated as the Fong lifted off, its thrusters groaning in protest, and Cade let out a long breath. Well, that was a disaster. Good news, we've got supplies. Bad news, we're on the galaxy's most wanted list. Zyra didn't respond right away. She stepped over to the crate, her movements deliberate despite the pain she was clearly hiding, and pulled the cylindrical core from where Cade had stashed it. The faint blue glow pulsed in her hands, casting eerie shadows across her sharp features. This is no longer a hunt, she said, her voice low and hard. It is war. Cade pushed off the wall, wincing as his arm flared. War, huh? Against your traitor buddies and the Zarvox Empire? That's a tall order, purple, even for a badass like you. Her silver eyes snapped to him, fierce and unyielding. They will not stop until they have a Cryon Vanguard. If the Zarvox wield it, your worlds, human worlds, will burn first. Yeah, I got that part, Cade said, running a hand through his sweaty hair. Planet-cracking superweapon in the hands of genocidal maniacs? Not my idea of good time. But we're two people, Zyra, one beat-up ship, no army, no plan. What's the move? She held his gaze, the core glowing between them like a silent promise or a curse. We destroy it, she said finally, before they find us. Cade blinked, then laughed, a dry, incredulous sound. Destroy it? You're serious? That thing's older than my ship, and probably tougher than both of us combined. How do we even? There is a way, she cut in, her tone brooking no argument. A forge on Vorin, built to unmake what our ancestors made. If we reach it, we can end this. Vorin, Cade's eyebrows shot up. Your homeworld? The one you said was a dead-end system? Not a long haul. Purple. And I'm betting it's not exactly a tourist spot these days. It is not, she admitted, her voice softening just a fraction. But it is our only chance. He studied her for a moment, the weight of her words sinking in. Then he sighed, slumping back against the wall. All right, say we do this. Race across the galaxy, dodge your traitor pals, and melt down your fancy key. Why me? You don't need a scruffy human pilot for that. You could ditch me at the next port, take the core, and go solo. Zyra's silver eyes flickered, something unreadable passing through them. She stepped closer, her boots echoing on the metal floor, and stopped just short of him. You could have left me, she said, her voice quieter now, almost searching. In the pod? In the fight? You did not. Why? Cade grinned, though it was softer this time, less bravado and more honesty. Guess I'm just that stupid. Or maybe 'cause humans don't bail on people who need 'em, even if they're prickly, purple warriors who try to stab me first chance they get. Her lips twitched, damn near a smile, and Cade felt a flicker of pride at that. You are reckless, she said, echoing her words from Varkey's 7. And strange, but you have strength. Not Voran's strength, but something else. Stubbornness, he offered, chuckling. Runs in the species. So what's it going to be, Zyra? You in or out? 'Cause if we're doing this, I need to know you're not going to bolt the second we hit trouble. She held his gaze for a long moment, then nodded a single firm motion. I am in. For now. Good enough, Cade said, pushing off the wall. Let's get you cleaned up, then we'll figure out how to not die on this suicide run. He jerked his head toward the med bay. Come on, Purple. You're leaking again. She glared but followed, her steps steady despite the exhaustion etched into her frame. In the med bay, Cade grabbed a fresh roll of bandages and motioned for her to sit on the exam table. She complied, peeling back the torn edge of her armor to reveal the graze on her shoulder. The purple skin was scorched, a stark contrast to its usual shimmer, and Cade winced as he dabbed it with antiseptic. Hold still, he muttered, leaning in close. His fingers brushed her shoulder, the heat of her skin seeping through his gloves, and he couldn't help but notice how smooth it was, even battle-scarred. Damn, you're tough, he said half to himself. Most folks will be crying by now. Voran, do not cry, she said, her voice steady, though her silver eyes flicked to his face. Yeah, I figured, he said, wrapping the bandage tight. Still, you're lucky I'm here. Medbay's not much, but I'm a pro at patching up messes. Her gaze softened, just a hair, and she tilted her head slightly. You are skilled for a human. High praise, Cade grinned, stepping back to admire his work. All right, you're good. Now about that forge. Any chance it's got a welcome mat? Were we walking into a death trap? It is abandoned, she said, sliding off the table. But the traitors may know of it. We must be swift. Swift's my middle name. Cade quipped, heading for the cockpit. Well, not really, but it sounds cool. Jax, how's our fuel looking? Barely enough to limp to the next system. Jax replied. You're pushing this ship past its limits, Cade. Limits are for quitters, he shot back, dropping into the pilot's chair. Zyra followed, standing beside him, her presence a quiet anchor in the cluttered space. He punched in coordinates, the NAV screen flickering as it calculated a route toward Voran. All right, Purple, buckle up. We're officially a team now. Team, don't let the galaxy burn. Catchy, right? She didn't reply, but her silver eyes lingered on him, a faint spark of something. Amusement, maybe, flickering there. Cade turned back to the controls, plotting their course, when a soft beep interrupted him. The comm panel lit up, a garbled signal cutting through static. Distress call, Jack said. Weak, encrypted, Voran's signature. Cade froze, glancing at Zyra. Your people. She leaned over the console, her arm brushing his as she tapped the screen. Her touch was brief, warm through his sleeve, and Cade's brain stuttered for half a second before he refocused. The signal clarified, a voice faint but urgent. This is Terran Vera, survivor. Cryon site, under attack. Need. The message cut off in a burst of static. Terran Vera? Cade asked, turning to her. Family. My sister, Zyra said, her voice tight. She lives. Cade's jaw tightened. And she's at the Cryon Vanguard site. Under attack. That's no coincidence. No, Zyra agreed, her fist clenching. The traitors are there. He leaned back, mind racing. So, we've got a choice. Stick to the Forge plan, or detour to save your sister, and maybe get a crack at that warship before the bad guys do. What's it going to be, Purple? Her silver eyes met his, fierce and resolute. We save her. Then we end this. Cade nodded, a slow grin spreading across his face. Knew you'd say that. Jax, reroute us. Full speed to the Cryon coordinates. Looks like we're crashing a family reunion. The Fong hummed as its engines kicked into gear, the starfield blurring outside. Cade glanced at Zyra, her purple silhouette stark against the cockpit's glow. You ready for this, partner? For war, she said, her voice steady. Always. Thought so, he chuckled. Let's hope we live long enough to regret it. The stellar Fong streaked through the void, its engines roaring as it chased the faint coordinates of Terran Vera's distress call. The cockpit was a flurry of blinking lights and soft hums, the NAV screen flickering with a route that cut through uncharted space toward the Cryon Vanguard site. Cade gripped the controls, his burned arm aching but steady, while Zyra stood beside him, her silver eyes locked on the starfield ahead. The air buzzed with unspoken tension. War was coming, and they both knew it. Jax, how long till we hit those coordinates? Cade asked, his voice tight but calm. 2 hours, give or take, Jax replied. Assuming this heap doesn't fall apart first. Fuel's low. Shields are a joke. Pick your poison, boss. Always a ray of sunshine, Cade muttered, adjusting their course to dodge a stray asteroid cluster. He glanced at Zyra, her purple silhouette rigid against the cockpit's glow. Your sister. Any chance she's got backup out there? Or are we walking into a solo rescue? Terran is a warrior, Zyra said, her tone clipped but laced with something softer. Pride, maybe, or worry. If she lives, she fights. But she is alone. The traitors would not spare her allies. Cade nodded, his grin fading. Then we're cavalry. Hope she's as tough as you. Purple, 'cause we're going to need all the help we can get. Zyra didn't reply, but her silver eyes flicked to him a silent acknowledgement. She shifted closer to the console, her arm brushing his shoulder as she studied the NAV screen. The contact was brief, her purple skin warm through his sleeve, and Cade's pulse kicked up a notch. He cleared his throat, forcing his focus back to the controls. Tight quarters, he mumbled, half to himself. Focus, she said, her voice sharp but not unkind. Yes, ma'am. He shot back, smirking despite the stakes. Just keep those stabby hands to yourself, and we'll be golden. The Fong pressed on, the stars blurring into streaks as they closed the distance. Cade's mind raced. Traitors, Zarvox, a planet-killing warship. It was a lot for a guy who'd started the week scavenging scrap. But then there was Zyra, this purple storm of a woman who'd turned his life upside down. And somehow, that made it worth it. An hour later, the sensors pinged, pulling him out of his thoughts. We got something, Jax announced. Wreckage ahead, Vorin signatures, multiple ships. And, holy hell, Cade, there's a big one. Massive energy readings. That's got to be the Cryon Vanguard. Cade leaned forward, the viewport revealing a chilling sight. A colossal ship loomed in the distance, sleek, angular, its hull a dull black that swallowed light. It dwarfed the Fong 100 times over, its surface studded with weapon arrays that screamed death. Around it floated a graveyard of smaller wrecks, their hulls torn apart, still smoking from recent combat. That's your Golden Age, Titan? Cade breathed, his voice a mix of awe and dread. Looks like it could eat us for breakfast. It could, Zyra said, her fists clenching. And it will if they awaken it. Great, Cade muttered. Jax, any sign of Terran? Faint signal, planet side, Jax replied. Small moon orbiting the Vanguard. She's down there, but so are hostiles, 3 ships, armed to the teeth. Zyra's silver eyes darkened. They have her pinned. Then we unpin her, Cade said, cracking his knuckles. Hang on. Purple, we're going in hot. He punched the throttle. The the Fong diving toward the moon's surface. The ship rattled as it hit atmosphere, the viewport flaring with re-entry heat, and Cade gritted his teeth. Come on, baby, hold together. They broke through the clouds, revealing a barren, rocky landscape scarred with craters. 3 Voran ships, sleek, predatory, hovered over a crashed pod, their weapons trained on a lone figure fighting below. She was purple-skinned like Zyra, her armor battered but intact, wielding a plasma blade against a dozen armored traders. Terran, Zyra breathed, her voice tight with relief and rage. She's alive, Cade said, grinning. And kicking ass. Let's give her a hand. He swung the Fong into a low pass, its rickety guns blazing. Bolts rained down, scattering the traders, and Cade hooped as 2 dropped. That's for shooting my ship, you bastards. Zyra moved to the hatch, her hand on the release. Drop me in, she said, her tone pure steel. You sure? Cade asked, banking the ship for another run. You're still banged up. I fight, she snapped, her silver eyes blazing. With my sister. Cade nodded, respect flickering in his chest. All right, Purple, go get him. He leveled the Fong, popping the hatch, and Zyra leapt out, landing in a crouch amid the chaos. She charged, a purple blur, her fists and stolen blade tearing through the traders like a storm. Cade kept the ship aloft, strafing the enemy ships as they returned fire. The Fong shuddered, a bolt clipping its wing, but he held steady, drawing their attention from the sisters below. Terran and Zyra fought back-to-back now, a lethal dance of purple fury, and Cade couldn't help but grin. That's my girl, he muttered, then blinked. My girl? Where'd that come from? The last trader fell, and the enemy ships broke off, retreating toward the vanguard. Cade brought the Fong down, its landing gear scraping the rocky ground. He stumbled out, blaster in hand, and found Zyra and Terran approaching, 2 purple warriors, battered but unbroken. Terran was shorter, her silver eyes narrower, but the family resemblance was unmistakable. Cade Rylan, he said, offering a hand. Nice to meet the other half of the Vera wrecking crew. Terran ignored his hand, her gaze cutting to Zyra. You trust this human? He has earned it, Zyra said, her voice firm. He fights with us. Cade's chest swelled just a little. Ah, Purple, you're gonna make me blush. Terran snorted, but Zyra's silver eyes held his, a silent thanks in them. The vanguard remains, she said, turning to the horizon where the Titan loomed. The Corps must not reach it. Agreed, Cade said, holstering his blaster. But we've got a breather. Let's patch up, refuel, and figure out how to blow that thing to hell. Back on the Fong, the cockpit was quiet, the sisters' reunion a mix of sharp words and unspoken relief. Cade leaned against the console, watching Zyra adjust Terran's armor. So, he said, breaking the silence, you sticking with me, Purple? Or is this where you ditch me for the family road trip? Zyra straightened, her silver eyes meeting his. You have proven yourself, Cade Rylan. I stay until the end. And what? He teased, grinning. The galaxy or us? Her lips twitched, almost a smile. We shall see. Cade laughed, turning to the controls. Fair enough. Jax, set a course, somewhere quiet. We've got a war to plan. The Fong hummed to life, lifting off into the stars, a fragile alliance forged in fire and ready for whatever came next.